Get ready to dive deep into marketing analytics. Our AI Polly is the first in the world capable of producing statistically valid audiences on social media. And she's opening up the floor with Ask Polly Tuesday. Every week, we're answering marketing problems from branding and PR professionals and how to solve them with data. Hello, welcome to Ask Polly Tuesday. Today in studio, we have our fabulous researcher, Marisol Bedoya. Marisol, today we're talking about data privacy, ad targeting. Why this topic right now?
So the Canadian government is actually implementing legislation when it comes to marketing and using data to better target and better advertise to audiences.
All right, so let's get to it. Are people in favor of legislation around data privacy and ad targeting?
They're not. What they are in favor of, though, is having the government legislate itself against the use of personal information.
Oh, that is ironic in a way, right? The government is bringing in legislation for private companies, but what you're saying is people are more concerned about the government getting access to our private information than they are about regular company, a commercial company.
Exactly. So what the general population's feeling is when private sectors use their personal data, they're delivering value. They're bringing them ads that are targeted towards their interests. However, when it comes to the government using personal information, they aren't delivering value. They're just using it for their own gain.
Interesting. Now, are there particular places where people are worried about that? Is there a particular issue?
So we use the ArriveCan app as a really good example of this.
So just to set it up while you're bringing up the graph. So the ArriveCan app for our audience was an application people used when they were traveling to come back into Canada. They had to fill out this app, and it became very contentious here because people felt it was hard to use. And that's what we thought was the problem with the ArriveCan app, but you found something else.
Yeah, so Polly is able to go into her samples of geographies and break down the groups by ideology. So we're able to see whether groups are more right-leaning or more left-leaning. And we looked at the ArriveCan app as an example of this and found that the right wing was much more concerned about what the government was using the information that was going into the ArriveCan app for.
So it looks like the government could use Polly because I mean, obviously they've got an issue here that they are largely unaware of, and they didn't realize that they were causing people to have this concern.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to data privacy, though, aside from ideology, are there other groups that you found that were more concerned about data privacy than others? And do we have something to compare it against? Like, so there's data privacy, but
what other issues are kind of synonymous to it? Yes, absolutely. So as context, we used the issue of cybersecurity as a way to compare the relevance of data privacy in the eyes of the general population. And we actually found that a lot of the engagement around data privacy was leaning towards 2018 when Cambridge Analytica was a big scandal. So we found that this issue was actually pretty exhausted. And one key issue that we wanted to compare it to was cybersecurity and what sort of tools and regulations were being brought in for this specific issue. To give a really cool outline of audiences that we found that were engaging on data privacy, I'll show you teachers first. So what we saw in these conversations was that teachers are trying to educate their students on how to better keep their information private to themselves.
So if we look, teachers are more concerned than the general population about data privacy. Interesting. Are there other audiences that are more concerned about data privacy than the general population?
Yes, we did. We found that policymakers as well. And obviously that comes into play a lot here because they're putting out a legislation around this specific issue. So they had a vested interest in this specific problem.
Right. So just to pause on it, like what policymakers are concerned about is what we get legislation on, right? So maybe they should be doing a little bit more public opinion polling to see if what they're concerned about is reflecting what the general population is concerned about. That's interesting. Any other groups?
The last one that I'll show you is actually investors. And you'll see here that it's relative to the general population, they're really engaged on this topic. And that has to do with their vested interests. So what companies they're invested in. They're advertising these companies that are out there with the goal of safeguarding personal information from private companies of their customers.
So a bit of a vested interest for the investors, right, to promote these tools. Now, you were saying that people do want these tools, so maybe it is good for investors. Now, do you have any examples? Like, because, I think generally people think it's good to guard your privacy or, to have this legislation. So why don't people, are there particular, can you give me some examples of where people don't want they're enjoying the value that they get from these targeted apps or ads?
For sure. So first I want to kind of discuss translation apps and the way that they go into keep their translations and keep their databases updated is by looking at conversations online and keeping up with the lingo that people are using. And if the government decided that they wanted to legislate how they're using this personal data, the translation apps that people use day to day would not be up to date with how people use language day to day. Another really cool example of this is education apps. So if parents, for example, are not concerned that their kids are using math apps to better their skills in certain subjects, then should this really be a big issue for audiences in general? It really isn't.
So that's interesting. So for the general population, they're saying, I want these apps to educate my kids. I don't want to have to pay for it. And if my kid has to look at toy ads, well, they see toy ads on TV, they see toy ads elsewhere. So what is the difference is basically what you're finding, right? Now, do you have any other examples, especially for our American audience, a general example? I think you looked at the menstrual tracking apps, right, during Roe v. Wade. What about that? I mean, are people concerned about that?
So the key concern during the Roe v. Wade dismantling was that menstrual apps were taking personal information from people and sending it to the government tracking whether people are getting pregnant and stopping them from having an abortion. So that brings in the government tracking once again and how private sector companies are using this personal data. It's not about the private sector specifically. Like if a person does get pregnant and they're starting to get, prenatal ads for products, that doesn't really matter. What they're concerned about is whether that information is going to flow back to their government.
So this is really, really interesting. So when will the government bring in legislation that guarantees it will not be able to ask companies for the private data of people? And why is that not included in legislation? I guess is a good question. Marisol, interesting as always. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us on Ask Polly Tuesday. If you have any questions or if you have an idea for something we can cover on the show, please write to us Tuesday at askpolly.ai. See you next Tuesday. Thank you for watching. If you like our podcast, please like us here and tell your friends. If you would like to be a guest on our program or bring your own market problems for Polly to solve, please send us an email at tuesday@askpolly.ai. See you next Tuesday.